Hello, and welcome to day 37 of Dungeon 23. Today we'll be making an addition onto the northernmost point of floor 2, and I do have an idea for a monster based on some things some people I know said. So although suggestions may not be heeded in their entirety, certain aspects will of course be recognized. I guess that's the right way of wording it. So, what are we going to be making today? Well, first let's actually sketch out the room. Now, my idea for the room is that it kind of has two 10-foot doorways, and then maybe also two 5-foot doorways? I'm not quite sure. Let me just sketch it out and see how I feel. Roll 20 does not like keeping my colors memorized, I guess. I don't know. It's annoying. Let's make this a bit more defined here. And this will be 2 rooms later. So, what are we going to put here? Well, one of the suggestions I got was to use a swarm. And the suggestion itself was for later in the dungeon, but I'm going to utilize a swarm monster now. So let's go ahead and actually put down our token for the swarm. And it's going to be a swarm of bats. Now, how do swarms work? Basically, the way they work is that they are a group of creatures that are sharing a stat block and also kind of occupying the same space. So the way it works is, let's take bats for example. Bats have like an AC of, I think like 10, maybe 12. And they only have like 1 or 2 HP. But they are a tiny creature. But a swarm of bats has, probably, I know for a fact they have 12 AC. I also know that they have 20 HP on average. Now that's a lot more HP than a singular bat, but that's because instead of being a tiny creature, it is a medium swarm of tiny creatures, meaning that the actual monster is a medium creature, although technically it is numerous tiny creatures. Well, actually, technically it's just one medium creature, but it's described as being multiple tiny creatures. Now, swarms typically have 2 things going for them. The first one is that they are typically immune to most conditions, that being charmed, frightened, grappling, paralyzed, petrified, prone, all those things. And that's because you target one of them, you grab one, but then the other ones are still fine, so the general health of the swarm is unaffected. They also typically have resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing. Not just magical or non-magical, but just in general, because the idea is that you're kind of dividing your focus and dividing your damage amongst them evenly. And that's like the first main one, is that they're kind of like just generally better than the individual. The second one is the swarm ability, or not the ability, but the attribute. Not attribute either. Trait? Trait. Like keen hearing, keen smell, that kind of stuff. The swarm trait basically says a swarm can occupy another creature's space, or another creature can occupy its space, and it can move through that space, assuming that the space is big enough to fit a singular one of the creature. So in the case of bats, it can move through a space that can accommodate a tiny creature. The other drawback, or rather the drawback to this trait though, is that a swarm cannot regain hit points, and it cannot gain temporary hit points. So healing is really off the table for these things. Now, for our swarm of bats, normally a swarm of bats is a medium swarm of tiny creatures. We're going to make ours a large swarm of tiny creatures, and we're going to actually bump up its HP. So, let's write Swarm of bats. And let's give it, it's usually 20. Let's give it 30. 30, just 30 is fine. And let's make a note here. Upon losing more than half of its HP, the swarm must make a DC, say 13, wisdom save or begin to flee. Check is remade every time the swarm takes further damage. So this is something that most creatures should really have, although it makes sense for these things to swarm. So it's going to just be hanging out in this like area here. And if, you know, the party comes along and fights it, once they, knock out quite a few, kill a bunch of them, the other bats are going to say, screw this, and they're just going to fly away. I don't want to give them the frightened condition necessarily, but they are going to begin to flee. And although, like, technically Swarm are never supposed to regain hit points, maybe they fly away, and if the party leaves the level and comes back later, then maybe they kind of re-bolster the numbers or, something like that. I don't know. That's not really important here. But the important thing is that it is a large swarm of tiny creatures. There's a lot of bats in this space here. And they could kind of move through a tiny creature space, or the space that could accommodate a tiny creature, which means that they could fully envelop a party member. And that they are immune to most effects. So actually, yeah, giving them the frightened condition wouldn't really work, because I think they are immune to frightened anyway. Although, we could always change that. But yeah, with that done, very simple room with a very simple monster. And it was based on a suggestion, so, as I always say, if you have a suggestion, comment down below. The suggestion itself may not be used, but, the ideas may be taken, So, yeah, like, comment, subscribe, obviously, all the stuff that I say every time. And, yeah, I apologize for the poor quality. It's not going to get any better.